Hello, everyone. Welcome to Big Jeff's Football Insights every Thursday on the Big Ten Huddle. We are presented and brought to you by FanDuel, part of the Believe Podcasting Network. And I'm your host, Big Jeff McMichael. As usual, this is pre-recorded earlier today on Thursday. As always, as a reminder, please like the podcast for us, forward it if you will, and subscribe, of course, to the Big Ten Huddle, where our goal, as always, is to provide comprehensive coverage and analysis of all Big Ten teams in an unbiased way. So really excited for this week. As I've been doing each week, wanted to give you a little personal update. My son's team, of course, I gave the update. We made the playoffs as a 4 seed. Centennial High School, we're in the 32-team Class 4A playoff, so that's the third highest in Georgia. And I live in the suburb just north of Atlanta. First round game is tomorrow night. We are the 4 seed, driving an hour and a half, maybe more, southeast of Atlanta, and we're a big underdog in this game. We're probably 25 points, depending on what rankings you look at, but really hopeful that we can pull an upset tomorrow night. So my son's a wide receiver. Pretty fun note for him. The other team has a very mobile quarterback. And Preston, he's pretty fast himself. He played some quarterback in middle school. So he's been, for the last 2 weeks, acting as our team's quarterback in practice, kind of like the scout team quarterback going against the first team defense, hopefully, representing what this dynamic quarterback looks like. So he'll be playing wide receiver tomorrow night, so just very excited for that. I know it's probably playoff football for a lot of you, and just has strong ties to our college football talk here. So the agenda for this week, first I'm going to review I'm choosing 2 games now per week instead of 5, so I'm going to review both of those for week 11 and draw some insights from it. My special topic this week is really cool. I'm going to look at a couple different ways to look at 16-team playoffs. So I'm taking the second committee playoff rankings from this Tuesday and looking at 2 different scenarios for 16-team fields and seeing how many Big Ten teams are in there, how many SEC teams, and drawing some insights. So I think you're really going to like that. It's pretty interesting because ultimately I do think that is the next step. We are going to be moving to a 16-team model. It's a matter of what that's probably going to look like. The third topic is my picks for this week. So week 12, I will be choosing Big Ten game of the week, I'm calling it, and then my Lock City pick, which is the game I'm most confident in against the spread. And then finally, depending on how much time we have, I have some general insights and random thoughts. That's going to depend on how long we go. I'm going to really try to keep it to no more than an hour if possible. And then the final reminder till we get into the content, all this information, including the tables that I'll be covering, since I realize some of you are just listening and won't be able to see these tables, all of that will be available in an article on my website. It's bigjeffsfootball.com. And that will be there by tonight, by the time you're able to access this podcast. All right, so let's get into the first topic here. I'm going to adjust my screen. And let's talk about week 11 and how it turned out. Here's a table that includes all the games, and highlighted in the color tables are the games that I was picking. Just so you know, I went 1-1 this week. I won my game of the week, which was the Oregon-Iowa game. That was a classic. I lost my Lock City pick game of the week, which was Penn State and Indiana, another classic as well. So for the season, I'm 27-25 here against the spread. Not bad. And then in Lock City, I moved to 5-3 with that loss. So as always, I like to talk about what I got wrong in week 11 first. So that's that one game. I took Indiana. They were giving 15.5 points to Penn State at Penn State. That's quite a bit. I'd predicted Indiana winning by 20, 34-14. Of course, Indiana was down 4, had to put together that 2-minute drive, and ended up winning the game 27-24, but very clearly not covering the 15 and a half. The 10-play, 80-yard drive, that was in 1 minute and 15 seconds. It's probably that touchdown throw from Fernando Mendoza to Omar Cooper Jr., where he somehow got his feet down in the back of the end zone. Really, it's currently the greatest play in Indiana football history for sure. And it's just one of the most acrobatic catches you'll ever make. I think that play could end up being, the ESPYs have the play of the year across all different sports. I bet you that's going to be a candidate, if not a potential winner of that award. A lot depends on what Indiana does with that win too. But really just an unbelievable play. I took Indiana in this one. Penn State going into the game was 1-7 against the spread on the year. Indiana was 6-3 against the spread, had won 3 of the last 4. And also they were just rolling teams, right? Covering easily. And I was basically taking the hot hand until I saw something different. Meanwhile, Penn State, had been playing under their potential in the 2 games coached by Terry Smith against Iowa and Ohio State. Even Grunkemeyer, the new quarterback taking over for Drew Aller, there was always the chance he could get settled in as a starter in this game, and that was a risk with me taking Indiana because those were tough road environments for sure. You also had the factor of Jim Knowles' knowledge as the defensive coordinator of Ohio State's offense. So, I said a reason Penn State to like them too potentially is the ability to put pressure on Fernando Mendoza like they did the prior week against Julian Sayin in Ohio State. And in fact, Penn State did generate a lot of pressure on Mendoza. And he didn't have the greatest game, Mendoza, until that last drive, quite frankly. He was 19 of 31 overall, 218 yards. But up until the last drive, Indiana only had 246 yards of total offense. And that included the big interception that Mendoza threw early in the fourth quarter. It led to Penn State scoring to go up 24-20. Key to the game, Penn State had the 14th rated Big Ten rush defense, and they really held Indiana's number 1 rated rushing attack in check. So Indiana only had 108 total rushing yards at 3.5 yards per carry. So, bodes well, I think, for Penn State to potentially win their final 3 games, which they're going to need to do to make a bowl game. They need to win 3 games just to go 6-6. But you saw a lot of good things in this game against Indiana. Now, for Indiana, the takeaways, I really felt, win or lose, when you have a tight game like this, it really, if you're able to come out on top, it pays dividends down the line. It makes you better battle tested. It gives you confidence. If you're in a close game, you'll find a way to win. So I really think there's a lot of good things that can come out of a close game versus a blowout. On the downside, I think this game revealed a real weakness for Indiana. And in games, basically, it's in games against really talented and physical defensive lines. That Big Ten leading rushing attack has really struggled. So against Iowa, Oregon, and Penn State, who have very good run defenses and strong front fours, Indiana averaged only 108 yards against those 3 teams, 3 yards a carry. So 104 yards against Iowa, 111 against Oregon, and 108 against Penn State. So very much held in check. And the worry there is if they meet Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game, Ohio State might have a better front 4 than these even. I mean, you could question that, but obviously their defense is great. So that's a question for Indiana, especially you contrast that with the 4 games against weaker competition. So if you look at the 4 teams of Illinois, Michigan State, UCLA, and Maryland, against those 4, Indiana averages 268 rushing yards a game, 6.1 yards per carry. So really, that run defense being ranked number 1 has been fed off of just dominating, teams that really aren't that good from a defensive perspective. Really what it highlights too, Indiana really needs star wide receiver Elijah Surratt back healthy. They're just not going to be able to run the ball real effectively against Ohio State without that better passing threat, and they really need Surratt back. The other thing, and I have my Indiana shirt. I'm an Indiana grad from 1990. This is kind of a good thing because it's an embarrassing stat. But with this win for Indiana, Northwestern has taken over as the losingest program in the FBS. So they've lost 716 games, and Indiana has lost 715 games. So thank you, Kirk Cignetti, for bringing us out of the cellar. Penn State, the takeaways, again, 6 losses in a row, but strong positives we talked about. Nick Singleton had his first big game in a while. The defense, which has been much maligned, played much better, as I described it, just until that final drive. And then Evan Grunkmeyer, first good game in his third start, 22 of 31, 219 yards. More importantly, he got the ball downfield, right? Terry Smith said, Andy Kotelnicki, you have to throw the ball downfield. I mean, the only way to do it is call those plays, and they did have success doing that. The interesting thing is, if you take out the Ohio State game, who beat Penn State handily, Penn State has lost 5 games by a total of 16 points, excluding Ohio State. And it's the reason why SP Plus, coming into that Indiana game, Penn State was ranked 22 in SP Plus. Now they're ranked 20th. So they actually improved with a loss, which is pretty amazing. So I see no reason why they can't win those last 3 games, starting with Michigan State this week. So what did I get right in week 11? Oregon. So they were a 6.5 point favorite. They were visiting a super hot Iowa team. I just felt that was too many points against a stingy Iowa defense. The bad weather conditions was a factor, and I thought that would play to the Hawkeyes and be the advantage there. Oregon ended up winning by 3 points. I had them winning 20-17. They prevailed 18-16. So they won by 2. I almost nailed the score. So really, I was right on the mark with this pick. There were times, though, that Oregon almost pulled away in this game. They were up 9-0 in the second quarter, 15-7 at the end of the third quarter. They were on the brink of, covering that 6.5 spread for sure. Unfortunately, Iowa missed the 2-point conversion when they went ahead. That would have gave them a 3-point lead, and that opened the door really to Oregon, making that drive down the field, 54-yard drive, 39-yard field goal by Atticus Sappington. Dante Moore, if you watch the game, he didn't play great in the game, but he had an amazing kind of thread the needle pass in the perfect spot for like a 24-yard gain to get them into that field goal position. Statistically, Oregon was much better, outgained the Hawkeyes 373-239. And I just felt, in my prediction, a reason Oregon to like them, their front four and defense is really highly rated by statistics and then by PFF as well. And that held in this game. Iowa, with that great offensive line, only rushed for 101 yards at 2.3 yards per carry. Yet another example of how, if you're a one-dimensional team like Iowa, it is much easier for a team to stack the box like Oregon did and stop that running game. So that's what's really, the passing game is still, unfortunately for Iowa, holding them back. And then on the other side, Oregon's rushing attack was outstanding. Iowa was good against the run, but Oregon, 261 rushing yards at 7.3 yards per carry. So I speak all of that to say, as takeaways for Oregon, it really speaks to their strength in the trenches on both sides of the ball. That's just huge once they get into the playoffs. I can tell you the trenches is the key thing. And this is despite injuries to many of their skilled players. And frankly, they're the least talked about team that really could make a run and potentially win the national championship, I feel, among all teams across college football. Also, in my review, I said this really demonstrates what a great job Dan Lanning and his staff do when traveling east. All other teams are struggling with that except for Oregon. They're now 7-0 in the last 2 years in the Big Ten when traveling multiple time zones east. So just pretty amazing, kind of crazy. They dropped a spot behind Ole Miss in the AP poll. I know JR covered that. Totally agree with him how ridiculous that is. Heartbreaking third loss for Iowa. Bad stat for them. They've now lost 12 games in a row against ranked opponents. So it's been since the 6th week of the 2021 season when they beat number 4 Penn State 23-20. It's been that long since Iowa has won a top 25 game. They have another chance this week, though, against USC. So let's get into my second topic here, my special topic. I'm going to get a little drink of water. All right. This is a really cool subject here, I think. So what I did, as I explained when I reviewed the agenda, the second playoff rankings came out this week, and I took that and looked at 2 different models that were talked about over the summer, 2 different 16-team playoff models. And so for this first one, this is the infamous 16-team 4-4-2-2-1 model. This was strongly supported by the Big Ten over the summer. And it's where basically you have auto bids, guaranteed bids, so to speak. And it goes like this: 4 bids each for the Big Ten and the SEC. The Big 12 and ACC get 2 automatic bids each. 1 is left for the group of 5 teams, and then that leaves 3 at-large open spots. In this model, too, what makes it interesting but also confusing, the Big Ten, and this is in one of the proposals, the Big Ten, their top 2 teams ranked by the committee, which in this case for this past week would have been number 1, Ohio State, and number 2, Indiana. Those 2 get, buys in essence. They automatically make the field. And then you would take the 3 through 6 teams as ranked by the committee, and they would have play-in games. So with that, the first play-in game, for example, you would have number 3 seated in the Big Ten, Oregon, happens to be ranked 8th by the committee, but they would be the number 3 team. They would host the number 6 team. In this case, it's Iowa, whose record is 6-3 right now. They're ranked 21 by the committee. So the winner of Iowa at Oregon would get the 3rd automatic berth. And then the 4th automatic berth would come from another play-in game. You would have number 5 seeded in the Big Ten, Michigan, at number 4, USC. Michigan is ranked 18th by the playoff committee, and that's in that left column there. You can see I have all the teams listed, their conference, and where the committee ranked them this week. Against USC, who happens to be ranked 17th by the committee at 7-2. So the winner of that would get an automated berth. And then after that, you would have to, as a Big Ten team, if you wanted to get that 5th team in, you would have to be among the high enough seeds to get that 5th team in. And so that's kind of at risk there. And that's why you could see, like I said, a team like Iowa potentially get in and knocking off a team that had a better regular season record. So there was talk about having a similar model where it's 4-4-2-2-1 plus 3 at-large bursts, but not having play-in games. I like that a lot better because, again, do we really need Iowa? It's kind of like rewarding them for having not the greatest regular season and giving them a chance to get in to the playoffs. Tony Batiti is a big advocate for this, though, because he came from Major League Baseball, where they have a lot of teams, getting into the playoffs. I just don't like it because it downgrades the importance of the regular season some. So don't think that would be a really good idea. So just looking at the left column, I put in colored rows who would make the field here. So the Big Ten teams are in green, the SEC are in brown, ACC is in dark blue, light blue is the Big 12, and then you got Notre Dame in like a gray color. And then there is one, of course, group of 5 teams that will make it, and they're in a light purple type of color. So when you look at it that way, it really shows that with this model, the bottom line results, and that's in the right column there at the bottom, the SEC would get in 6 teams based on how this ranks. So the 4 automatic qualifiers are Texas A&M, Alabama, Georgia, and Ole Miss. But then because Texas is ranked number 10 and Oklahoma is ranked number 11, they would get 2 of the 3 at-large bids, and you end up with the SEC, unfortunately, getting 6 teams in. For the Big Ten, we would only get the 4 auto qualifiers. So in this case, I'm saying that would be Ohio State, Indiana, and let's say in the play-in games, the top seeds won. So the 4 teams in this model would be Ohio State, Indiana, Oregon, and USC, assuming that they would all win. The Big 12 gets 2 teams in. That's number 6 seeded by the playoff committee, Texas Tech, and then number 12, BYU. The ACC gets their 2 auto bids. So Miami at number 15 and Georgia Tech at number 16. So I think, ACC would actually benefit from this model because without that, they probably only get 1 team in. And then the 3 at-large bids go to number 9, Notre Dame, the group of 5 team, of course, and then which is number 24, South Florida. And then, like I said, the other 2 at-large actually were the other 2 SEC teams. So if you look at this model, the 2 teams that just missed the cut, according to the committee, it's actually the teams there ranked 13th and 14th. Utah at number 13 in the Big 12 would have been out and just missed. And then number 14 is Vanderbilt from the SEC. Those would have been like the first 2 out, so to speak, kind of like they do in basketball when talking about the tournament there for March Madness. Like I said, ACC is pretty lucky to get 2 in. I think obviously the SEC would be very happy to get 6 teams in. The group of 5 is always going to be happy. I doubt that the group of 5 teams are going to finish in the top 16. So really, this is a model that at least gives them a seat at the table, which is good for them. The closest, I guess the first team out for the Big Ten then would be Michigan. Michigan, ranked 18th by the committee, would not make that 16-team playoff field. The other thing to keep in mind is just let's remember how that compares to the current 12-team field. So with that 12-team field, there's only 3 Big Ten teams getting in. So currently, Ohio State, Indiana, and Oregon. The SEC would get 5 teams in the current 12-team playoff field. Big 12 and ACC get 1 each. Notre Dame gets a bid, and then South Florida would be your group of 5 representative. So I just think it's interesting because, again, I do think we're ultimately going to move to a 16-team model. It's a matter of what that looks like. I hope that it doesn't expand beyond that. I'm fine with 16, but anything more than that, I really would be against that. All right, so let's look at a second 16-team field here. And I'm going to get a drink of water again. All right. So in this one, there are many different models to potentially look at. But in this model, I was looking at one where, let's say, 16-team field, all 4 of the Power Conference championship winners, those 4 would get automatically into the field, right? And they wouldn't get like the top 4 like they did last year. It'd be similar to this year where it's based on the playoff rankings. That's where they would be seeded. Then we'd give 1 to the group of of 5, highest ranked group of 5. And then the rest in this model, 11 at-large bids, right? So this really opens it up to other teams and the Big Ten to potentially get more teams in. The beauty of this model, definitely a lot more simple for everyone to understand. You don't have all these play-in games, much more based on the playoff committee rankings. So I think that's good when, you can explain the model easier. So what if we took Tuesdays, the week 2 playoff rankings, what would this look like? Playing this one out though, we actually get only 3 Big Ten teams. So the other model, of course, we get 4 automatic qualifiers. This one, we get only 3 teams: Ohio State, Indiana, and Oregon as the number A seed. The closest and the team that would be left out would be number 17 USC in this model. Bad news here. SEC, how many teams would they get in this model? 7 teams. Yeah. They'll be doing cartwheels. All my neighbors, I live in Atlanta here, like I mentioned, they'd be doing cartwheels. So 7 SEC teams, including Vanderbilt. So Texas and Oklahoma ranked 10th and 11th get in, and then Vanderbilt is kind of like a 7th team. Committee ranked them number 14. So Vandy would get in this model. And I really think, this is why the Big Ten is advocating so hard for those 4 automatic qualifiers that they want. Now in this one, the Big 12, they actually get 3 teams in. So Texas Tech, BYU, and Utah. So that's favorable for them. And then the poor old ACC, in this model, they only get Miami in. Georgia Tech is kind of like the first team out of any conference. And so Miami gets 1 team, and it's why I did a podcast on this back in the spring where I said the ACC should kind of like the getting 2 auto bids, because based on how weak they are, that's probably a good thing for them. And at least based on these rankings, that supports that. Then finally, we have Notre Dame grabbing a spot at number 9, of course, as an independent. And then we still have the group of 5 rated team as South Florida. I think a major negative of this more open model, if you will, I do like the simplicity of it, but I really think it's going to discourage teams from playing those tough non-conference games. When you play a tough non-conference game, that risks that 3rd loss. And I think right now, even, we just punish teams too much for that 3rd loss versus if you play a close game and lose. That's just my opinion. USC is kind of an example this year. They have Notre Dame on the schedule. They had to play at Notre Dame. They lost by 10, played pretty well. But that could come back to haunt USC even this year, where if they end up with 3 losses, are they going to get credit, quote, credit for losing by 10 at Notre Dame? And they'll be competing Notre Dame for a spot. Notre Dame has 2 losses. So it kind of disincentivizes you to play tough non-conference games, I feel, versus the 4-4-2-2-1 format. When you could be one of the 4, I think that would encourage you to play more tougher non-conference games. And that's really what all of us want to see. We want to see better football games. It's why this expanded playoff field is good, because we do get more games that matter. But I do find that might be a negative of this more open model. All right, so that's that subject. I listened to Josh Pate some, and he's always stopping to get a water break, and I know why. Because when you're doing this on your own, you need some water breaks. Okay, so let me zoom out. Let's get to the next topic, which is this week's games and this week's picks. Okay, so this week we have 8 Big Ten games. I have them listed here in the table. Just like last week, I'm going to pick 2 of these games and not all 5. So my Big Ten game of the week is Iowa against USC. So USC is given 6.5 points to Iowa. That's in the green row. And then my Lock City pick is in light purple. I'm going to be choosing Indiana, giving 29.5 points to Wisconsin. Just Going to make a few comments on other teams first before getting in my picks. One thing to note, of the 8 games, only 2 are in the single digits. So in 3 of the spreads are at least, 23, no, at least 25.5 points or more. It really speaks to, we have too many bad bottom feeder teams in the Big Ten. It also speaks to how we have some super strong teams leading to those really big spreads as well. Just in contrast, I looked at the SEC. They have 6 conference games this week. 4 of the 6 are single-digit spreads. And then the biggest spread is Texas A&M favored by 18.5 over South Carolina. Ultimately, I do think it's better for the Big Ten. We need the things to level out a little bit more. The bottom of the Big Ten needs to get better so we don't have these huge spreads. And, that's leading to games like, it's kind of sad. The featured 3:30 CBS game with Gary Danielson and Brad Nessler. It's Penn State at Michigan State. Now, the spread is only 7.5, but it's because it's 2 really underperforming teams. The combined Big Ten records of those 2 teams is 0-12, and both those teams are 3-6, and that's the highlighted CBS game. That's not good, right? We don't want that as a conference long term. I do think things will get better as we move along here, but that's something to note. The other thing to note is just the Big Ten. We are top heavy, like I said, so that is good. We've got the top 3 teams, Ohio State, Indiana, and Oregon. When you look at both ESPN SP Plus rankings, put the top 3 teams in the Big Ten, and then Pro Football Focus has team rankings as well. And they also have the top 3 teams as Big Ten teams. So there's multiple ways to rate teams that really do show beyond AP rankings. And the AP rankings, I think, have underrated Oregon at 8. But most of these ratings definitely like the Big Ten teams. And it really speaks to how we truly are top heavy. 4 of these games are going to be probably easy wins. Oregon over Minnesota, Illinois over Maryland, Washington over Purdue, and Ohio State over UCLA. So 4 games where it's highly unlikely to see an upset. I think one of the most interesting ones is Michigan at Northwestern. I believe that one's at Wrigley Field, the annual game at Wrigley Field. I think it's interesting. Michigan improving a lot. They're up against Northwestern, a Wildcat team that's good at playing physical football. So I think this is a good matchup for Northwestern. They do better against running teams and not strong passing teams. USC was not a good matchup for Northwestern, just too much good skill position players. And what's interesting too is this game opened with Michigan favored by 9.5 on Sunday, and by Tuesday that had moved to 12.5. So a move of 3 points is a lot. So a lot of money going Michigan's way against Northwestern. I think that's a pretty good one, even though I'm not picking that technically to take Northwestern. And Michigan fans, I'm not saying Michigan's not good. I think Michigan wins that game. But Northwestern would look pretty good in that game to me. All right, so I'm going to talk about the first game then. Let's talk about the game of the week. USC giving 6.5 points to Iowa per FanDuel, over under 49.5. Really a compelling game. 2 teams who win in very different ways, right? Contrast in styles. USC leads the nation in passing offense, about as dynamic of an offense as you can get. Iowa is all about the trenches. They have the worst passing offense in the Big Ten. So the best against the worst here. And then they do other things well, obviously, that we'll talk about. After Iowa lost last week with 3 losses, they're really out of the running, I feel, for, there's a chance slightly that they can make, a 12-team playoff, but I doubt that. But they have a chance to kind of return the favor, eliminating a West Coast team after they lost to Oregon last week. So they could, knock USC out with their 3rd loss. ESPN SP Plus has USC ranked 12th in the nation. Interestingly, SP Plus has them with the number 1 ranked offense as well. Maybe not surprising. Iowa, 15 per SP Plus. So again, the AP poll, it's crazy. They dropped Iowa from the rankings. AP doesn't know what they're doing. I know there's a lot of reasons for that. Like, these are sports writers covering teams, and they're on deadlines to write articles, and they don't have time to watch all these games. So we're going to get, not surprisingly, bad results from this. But SP Plus loves Iowa, and the committee really respects Iowa. And I think that's smart. SP Plus also has Iowa as the 6th ranked defense in the nation. Against the spread this year, USC 5-4 against the spread. They have covered the 3 of their last 4 games, though. Iowa 6-2-1 against the spread and covered 6 of their last 7. So Iowa's definitely doing better than against expectations. So as usual, I like to say reasons why one team can cover or not. So USC, I have 3 reasons why they can cover the 6.5. The first one, USC plays like a top 10 team at home. They're 6-1 at home, with their only loss. So in the last, since being in the Big Ten, they're 6-1 at home in conference games. The only loss was last year to Penn State in overtime, 33-30. The other thing is Iowa's traveling west, right? That's a factor. Iowa last year, in their one game they traveled west, they lost to an under 500 UCLA team. Not a very good team. They lost 20-17. So, the travel is a real deal, except for Oregon. Oregon's figured it out. Everyone else struggles with it. USC 3-0 at home this year, mostly dominated their opponents. Beat Michigan State by 14. Michigan was ranked 18th at the time. They beat them by 18, and Northwestern by 21. So at home, just, they get ideal weather, that dynamic offense. They seem to run on all cylinders at home. Number 2 reason to like USC, it's just difficult to contain a dynamic and explosive offense like USC. They've got NFL caliber receivers, a really good tight end, and then a play caller, Lincoln Riley, who knows how to take advantage of mismatches with that great skill level. And then Iowa has struggled with teams like this in the past. I am excited. So just digging deeper on this, you got Lincoln Riley's innovative offense versus, of course, Norm Parker's, fundamentally sound and famous zone defense. Is really going to be a fun watch. I think a reason, though, that Iowa's lost 12 straight games to ranked opponents is when you play a ranked opponent, you tend to play teams that do have better skill players, better ability to pass the ball. And Iowa just can't contain those type of offenses as much as other type of teams. So USC, 2nd in the nation and 1st in the Big Ten in total offense. 503 yards per game they average. They're 1st in Big Ten passing, 4th in Big Ten rushing. What's interesting, 200 yards per game they average, and they're doing it with like their 4th running back, King Miller, who's a walk-on. What a great story. He averaging 7.9 yards per carry, 636 yards per game. So Todd McShay, I listen to him some. He's loving what he sees in King Miller, ability to put his foot in the ground and just explode upfield. In USC, 7th in the nation in scoring almost 40 points a game. They're just hard to stop USC. They do everything well offensively. Third reason to like USC. Now, I was going to list all these reasons why in the margins Iowa's better, like turnovers and conversion rates and things like that. I thought, Iowa's going to be better there. That's a reason to list them. USC is actually better in a lot of these variables. So I'm listing these things as a reason to like USC. Turnover ratio, Iowa's +4, USC +3. Almost a wash there, right? Net punting, USC is better in net punting. Who would think that? 68th in the nation, which isn't awesome, but it's about in the middle. There's 134 teams in FCS. Iowa's 100th in the nation in net punting. They're worse than USC. 4th down conversion rate for USC. They're 14th in the nation. Iowa's 13th, but that's a wash, right? Red zone defense. USC is third in the nation in red zone defense. Iowa is a very good 35th, but that's not as good, obviously. And then red zone offense, not surprisingly, USC 11th in the nation, and Iowa is good at 20th in the nation, but that's worse than USC. So there's some things in the margins that do favor USC as the third reason. Okay, let's get in the reason why like Iowa. 3 reasons. Iowa's great offensive line. Every time I talk about Iowa, their physicality, that's a tough matchup for USC's defensive line, who's been mostly average against good running defense and physical defenses, or physical offenses, But it gives hope that Iowa can run the ball and control the clock. And, I've said this before, all 5 Iowa offensive line starters are in the top 10 among all Big Ten offensive linemen. So they're excellent. The issue is, and why Iowa didn't look that good against Oregon, when you can't throw the ball, Oregon could load the box. So no matter how good that line is against great offensive lines or defensive lines, Iowa's still going to struggle. There's only so much you can do when people load the box. So, Iowa pass offense, 133 yards per game, 4th worst in the nation. So that's an issue there. But again, that line is good enough against a front like USC that's not as good as the top of the Big Ten teams. Gives Iowa hope. I mentioned this last week. Iowa in scoring offense, they're 10th in the Big Ten, almost 30 points a game. Way better than people think. This is a far cry from 2 years ago when they were averaging like 15 a game under Brian Ferentz, which is a disaster. And then USC, they're only 12th in total defense. And 10th in Big Ten rushing defense. So that gives Iowa hope they can run the ball, control the clock. Number 2, why I like Iowa. If they can run the ball, control the clock, keep their defense off the field, that's going to give their defense and keep them fresh and allow them to stay in the game. So, despite struggling to stop the run versus Oregon, their defense is still really fundamentally sound. They're 3rd in Big Ten total defense, 4th in passing defense, 4th in rushing defense. So as long as they're not out there all the time, they do have hope to contain at least USC's offense to hopefully cover that 6.5. The key is Iowa can't let USC run all over them like the Ducks did. And then the third reason to like Iowa, they do have an advantage over USC in hidden yards, and they're going to need that in a big way in this game. They're going to have to win the field position battle, especially given their pass challenged offense. So, here's some key things. And the key guy here is Caden Weegan. He drives the punt and kick return statistics and numbers for Iowa. Weegan is 2nd in the nation in punt returns, averages 24.4 yards per return. He's 1st in the nation in combined kickoff and punt returns at 674 yards. So, that's a big thing is, him flipping the field, so to speak, for field position. That can be big, given that Iowa offense a short field to score. Penalty yards per game. Iowa leads the nation with only 20 yards per game in penalties. They only have 20 penalties in 9 games. That's incredible. They're very disciplined. USC, meanwhile, 75th in the nation in penalties. So 56 yards per game. So that's 30. It's almost 40 yards there. USC on average is giving up in penalties. Kickoff returns, Iowa 13th in the nation, 26 yards per return. USC only 110th. So Iowa's better there by like about 10 yards. Punt returns, Iowa's 2nd in the nation, not surprisingly, 1st in the Big Ten, 26 yards per return. So again, Iowa just has an advantage getting those hidden yards. So what's my call here? Iowa must run the ball really well to hang with USC in this game. Go for it on 4th down whenever possible. They need to score touchdowns and not field goals in the red zone. Iowa is 20th in the nation in red zone offense, so they need that to continue and have success there. But I don't like the matchup overall for Iowa. USC high-powered, highly skilled players, balanced offense. Iowa, where's their head at coming off that disappointing loss, traveling across the country? I think Iowa will hang in there for a while. They're just so sound as a team, but the defense is going to tire, be on the field too long, and I see the Trojans pulling away late. So I'm calling this USC 34, Iowa 20. So I'm giving a high confidence that USC will cover the 6.5 and win this game. Drink of water. All right, my Lock City game. I have Indiana giving 29.5 points to Wisconsin. That's FanDuel odds. 43.5 is the over-under. Again, intriguing matchup. Both teams with some wind in their sails. Obviously, Indiana, 10-0, need to beat Wisconsin, and then the final at Purdue, and then they're in the college football playoffs, and they're in the Big Ten championship game. So they're riding high. Greatest win they've ever had last week. Meanwhile, Wisconsin 3-6 overall, 1-5 in the Big Ten, but they broke their 6-game losing streak last week, beating number 23 ranked Washington 13-10 at home. I just think, Luke Fickell being officially retained, they're playing young players who are excited to be playing Wisconsin is. So I think this Badger team comes into Bloomington with a lot of momentum, and they're going to play really hard. SP Plus, Indiana is ranked second. Wisconsin has the worst SP Plus ranking in the Big Ten. They're ranked 90th in the nation. So that's worse among all teams. Against the spread, Wisconsin's 4-5 against the spread. Indiana is 6-4 versus spread. So nothing stands out there super strong. All right, so why Indiana can cover that really big spread, 29.5 points. I have two reasons. Number one, I guess it really starts with, the evaluation of this question, this game. How many points can this Wisconsin offense, who can't pass the ball, and they're likely starting, again, a true freshman quarterback in Carter Smith, how many points can they realistically score against Indiana, who's, fifth best in the nation in total defense, third best in the Big Ten? If you look at Wisconsin's offense, last in the Big Ten, like we talked about, second to last in the nation. So they're 133 out of 134 teams in total offense, which is 256 yards per game. They're also last in the Big Ten and third to last in the nation in scoring, 12.6 points per game. Second to last in Big Ten passing and rushing. I could go on and on. Jeff, stop, please. Meanwhile, Indiana's defense, fourth best in total defense, second best in run defense still. That's a little fallback from last week after Oregon had some great success. And then we talked about Carter Smith starting here. So, Wisconsin's going to try to run the ball here as best they can, slow the pace down and everything. Wisconsin's offensive line is playing better, but, they still rate as average per Pro Football Focus across all 5 positions. Meanwhile, Indiana's defensive line and entire starting 11 all ranks well above average per Pro Football Focus. And add to it, Wisconsin's, top running back Dylan Jones is still likely out. So it's going to be tough. And, 6 Big Ten games, Wisconsin is basically scoring under 7 points a game, 6.7. The most they've scored is 13, and that was last week in the win against Washington. Everything else has been 10 points or lower. So really, I'm going to say, Wisconsin scores a touchdown, about their average on Indiana. And if they do that, Indiana, is going to have to hold Indiana to 36 or under to cover, while Indiana averages almost 45 points a game. So I think that favors kind of Indiana, right? Like thinking how much Wisconsin can score there. I guess second, despite some key injuries, Indiana's offense still second best in the Big Ten, still very well balanced. Only Oregon has better balance than they did. So if they get off to a big lead, don't be surprised if Cignetti and his staff stay very aggressive, and that will increase their chances for cover. So let's go a little deeper on that. Indiana has this type of team and the mindset, if they get ahead on you early, they smell blood in the water and they stay aggressive. Some teams like throttle back a little, not Indiana. So it's a deadly combo given how well, Indiana runs the ball too. So even if they're not always running, mixing and run pass, they're still really moving the ball even when they turn to the run. And then another factor here is, will Cignetti keep Mendoza in maybe longer than he would, even if they're are sufficiently in the lead, because Mendoza wants to win the Heisman. If he does, that's a recruiting coup for Cignetti and his staff. So I know there's a risk there not to injure him, but that's a very real factor that could cause that score to be higher and allow Indiana to cover. Why I take Wisconsin in the points? 3 reasons here. Against really good quarterbacks with outstanding receivers, Wisconsin has struggled the last 2 years. And really, this game, though, when you think about it, with Elijah Surratt out, will Indiana's passing game be as effective? I know it won't be as effective. So will they be aggressive? There's a potential they maybe lean into their run game more because of that. And that would be play into the strength of Wisconsin, which has a physical and a pretty good defense. So Wisconsin's defense, 11th in the Big Ten in total defense, but they're getting better as the year goes along. Their run defense has been good all season, ranked 7th in the Big Ten. They're starting a couple young linebackers who are playing awesome. So Mason Poza, he's a linebacker, freshman. He rated number 1 in the Big Ten. He's currently ranks per Pro Football Focus number 1 in the Big Ten across all defensive positions. So that's how well he's playing with limited snaps. Cooper Catalano, he's also a freshman. His Pro Football Focus numbers rank really well. He had a big day against Washington last week. What's interesting about him, he went to Germantown High School in Wisconsin. My brother and his 3 nephews all went there, and one of them played there. And they pointed out last night, I didn't know this, Catalano is the all-time leading tackler in the state of Wisconsin. So he's basically like a 4-year starter there. And so, just young talent like that has the capability to give that Indiana offense some trouble. And then their senior end, Mason Rieger for Wisconsin, ranks 12th among all Big Ten defensive players per PFF, and last week led the nation in pressures. So the final thing about Wisconsin's defense too, they run a 3-3-5 defensive scheme, very unusual, but it's similar to what Old Dominion ran. So that was in week 2 against Indiana. Old Dominion had a lot of success. Indiana had only their 4th lowest yards per play that day, 5.6 yards per play against that 3-3-5 defense. So that's a factor here as well. What's the second reason to like Wisconsin? Just the key injuries. We talked about Elijah Surratt, but star left guard Drew Evans is out. He's been a stud for Indiana. He's likely out in this game. His replacement likely to be redshirt freshman Adedamola Ajani. If you look at how he ranks, it's pretty weak. They bring Indiana's tried Zen Mikulski there as well. Either way, that line was not as effective last week with Drew Evans out, and that's a pretty big deal because Indiana, they destroy teams with weaker defenses. Illinois, 63 points, 56 UCLA, 55 against Maryland. But against stronger fronts, like Wisconsin has a front more similar to Iowa, where Indiana only scored 20, to Oregon, where Indiana scored 30, and Penn State, where they scored 27. So that's 26 points per game against those 3 tough teams. I have a hard time seeing Indiana playing Elijah Surratt, knowing they're going to win this game most likely. But do you want to risk injury? Surratt has a hamstring injury. Those things can hang around. With Surratt out, will they rely on that run game more? And if so, Wisconsin maybe can really hang and limit the scoring for that Indiana. So that's a reason why I think, there is a good chance Wisconsin can keep that offense into the low 30s or 20s even potentially. Number 3, to like Wisconsin, just the confidence from coming that big win against Washington last week, huge mental lift for them. I think they're going to come out and play really hard, and then playing those young players, it's a lift there. And then knowing their coach is not going to be fired, right? I think that they got a lift from that. That's no longer hanging over their heads. So So what's my call here? I think Wisconsin's going to come in the game more energy, more confidence than possibly any game this season. Wisconsin's offense too weak to pull off the upset. But again, Surratt out, so Indiana will lean more into the run game. A couple unknown variables. Will Indiana be a little flat after the Penn State big win, right? Will Cignetti stay aggressive to pad those stats for the Heisman candidacy? But I'm just saying, with the physical defense of the Badgers, I think Cignetti will be fairly conservative, not wanting to get Mendoza hurt. He's going to keep Surratt out. All that means I think Wisconsin is going to cover here for my Lock City pick. I'm going to call it Indiana 35, Wisconsin 7. So 28-point win for Indiana, not covering the 29.5 points. I have to be honest too. I would like to take that other game as the Lock City because I really like USC, but since that's the game of the week, I can't do it. So it leaves me with taking this Indiana game here. So that's the third topic. So I see we're at about 55 minutes. Just going to hit a couple random thoughts here before we get out of here. I thought it was interesting going into, everyone's projecting Ohio State against Indiana in the Big Ten championship. And I must say that we're getting ahead of ourselves there. Michigan's perfectly capable, as we know, of beating Ohio State. And if we get a bad weather game in Ann Arbor, that really lends itself to Michigan's passing game. And Ohio State's offense, let's face it, is based more on the pass than the run. So this thing is not over. But FanDuel had projected if Ohio State and Indiana meet in the Big Ten championship game on a neutral field, they had Ohio State as a 3-point favorite. After Indiana struggled to beat Penn State, now the current odds as of yesterday, I think it was, that moved up to Ohio State favored by 5.5. I think that's about right, really. We're going to talk about this in future podcasts now for some of the reasons that on that. But still, if you're favored by less than a touchdown against Ohio State, you're still highly, highly thought of for sure. I guess the other topic to mention, a couple others. Last week, I did an analysis of looking at if you didn't use the AP Top 25 poll and instead use ESPN SP Plus to look at how many top 25 teams the SEC teams are playing versus the Big Ten. Last week when I did the analysis, SP Plus had 9 SEC teams in the top 25 and 9 Big Ten teams. That meant really both teams were probably, if you looked at their schedule, playing the same amount of top 25 teams in general. But this week, SEC has 9 SP Plus top 25 teams. The Big Ten has more. It has 10 SP Plus teams because Penn State's jumped a little bit. Iowa didn't fall out of the SP Plus. So now if I would do that analysis, it would turn out the Big Ten is playing more games against top 25 teams if you used SP Plus than the SEC. And my point of last week is imagine how that would change the narrative, because that's what SEC people, now that they haven't won the last 2 national championships, they're falling back on, we're deeper. And I do think the SEC is deep. Don't get me wrong. But we're so much deeper than you guys because we're playing all these top 25 teams. It's very overstated because the AP poll, frankly, loves the SEC and they don't like the Big Ten as much. And you might say, well, why is that, Jeff? To my view, the AP poll is always lagging. Even if a team starts out high in the AP poll, if they do bad, it takes a while for the AP poll team, the AP voters to believe it, because they're not watching all the games. They're doing their day job, which is writing about the team they cover. On the other hand, it's going to take a while. If the Big Ten wins again this year, I think their AP poll voters will finally start to change their view of what they think about Big Ten teams. And that's when you're going to see the AP top 25 start to favor the Big Ten a little bit more. Just want to hit on a final thing. Just Fernando Mendoza, the idea that he's maybe sealed the Heisman Trophy with the big final drive against Penn State. I just want to say I don't believe that's true at all. Now, that's what we remember most recently. So FanDuel odds moved from saying being favored going into last week. Currently, FanDuel has Mendoza at plus 130 to win the Heisman. Sayin is at plus 170. Third, by the way, is Marcel Reed of A&M at plus 700. So Mendoza and Sayin are clearly the two modes. But my thing would be that's a seminal moment and certainly a Heisman moment. But think about Sayin. He's going to be playing against Michigan in one of the most watched games of the year. It is no matter what, and it will be again this year. If he balls out in that game, that's going to resound with the voters, right? It's recency bias. Meanwhile, Indiana's playing Purdue. Then when you get to the Big Ten championship game, that's another opportunity for those two players. So I'm not advocating for one or the other. All I'm saying is this thing is far from over. And the other thing to point out is, and if you listen to scouts, Mendoza in the biggest games, yes, he's led some really clutch drives in the fourth quarter to win the games. But in each game, he's thrown a bad interception that put Indiana in the spot where they had to come back. So against Iowa, 2:50 left in the game. It was tied 13-all. He throws an interception. Iowa ends up missing a field goal. Mendoza hits Surratt for a long touchdown. They win the game. Against Oregon, it's Indiana's up 20-13. 12 minutes left in the game. He throws a pick six to make it 20-20. And then he leads Indiana to two other scores where they win. But again, that pick put him in a bad spot. And then against Penn State, Indiana's up 20-17. About 10 minutes left in the game. He throws a pick near midfield, I think it was. Indiana was up 3. That led Penn State to scoring. I think that was the where Singleton scored, I believe. Put Penn State up 24-20. And then forced Indiana to come back, which he did. So a lot of good, right? He's got ice in his veins, but some of those throws, the scouts are saying they're bad. They've been bad throws by Mendoza. So there's a mixed bag. And if you look at Sayin, he's not making those big plays. It's why Ohio State's rolling teams. Granted, their schedule hasn't worked out as tough as some would think. But so bottom line is far from over in the Heisman. And the good news is, it's looking pretty good for a Big Ten player to win the Heisman. So I think that's all I wanted to cover this week. Hope you enjoyed that. The look at the 16-team field. Again, all this will be on my website, bigjeffsfootball.com. Again, please like and subscribe to the Big Ten Huddle. Very important for JR and crew. I am going to be joining JR for his Saturday night top power ratings. So I'll be joining him in Zach's place. Zach is enjoying himself on vacation. And then on Sunday night, I'll be joining JR as well. So JR does just some great stuff. I'm, happy to support it all. Final thing would be like me and follow me at Big Jeff's FT Ball on X. And good luck to your teams this week. And bye for now.